Welcome to PsyberSpace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston. This week, we're diving into the muddy waters of uncertainty and how it affects our decision-making. We're not just talking about calculated risks here. We're exploring true uncertainty where the odds aren't clear, the variables are unknown, and the future feels like a dense fog. Our listeners in the U.S. and anyone else around the world impacted by their recent turmoil likely know exactly what I'm talking about. From job changes to global crises, uncertainty colors our daily lives. Think about it. How many decisions have you had to make recently where you had absolutely no idea what might happen next? In today's episode, we'll explore what happens in your brain when it faces the unknown, why uncertainty feels so uncomfortable, and how we can make better choices even when we can't see the path ahead. I'm super excited about today's topic. As you know, poor decisions under uncertainty can have serious consequences, from burnout and anxiety to missed opportunities that could have changed your life. The research in this field has exploded in recent years, and psychologists, neuroscientists, and behavioral economists have uncovered fascinating insights about how our brains navigate the fog of the unknown. By the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly why uncertainty makes your brain feel so uneasy, the mental shortcuts your brain takes to cope, and practical strategies to make better decisions when the future is unclear. So let's step into the unknown together. When we face uncertain situations, our brains often interpret them as threats. Research has shown that our amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes hyperactive when we can't predict what's coming next. This isn't just psychological discomfort. It's a biological response rooted in our survival instincts. Our ancestors needed to be cautious in unpredictable situations, and that caution is still hardwired into our neural circuitry. Interestingly, psychologists have identified something called intolerance of uncertainty, or IU, which varies significantly between individuals. People with high IU tend to find ambiguous situations extremely distressing and often experience anxiety, decision paralysis, or impulsive choices when facing the unknown. It's like some people have a lower threshold for uncertainty before their stress response kicks in. And when that stress response activates, our body releases cortisol, our attention narrows to potential threats, and our ability to think broadly about possibilities diminishes. The physical manifestations of uncertainty intolerance are also interesting. Researchers have found that people with high IU often experience increased heart rate, shallow breathing, and even digestive issues when facing ambiguous situations. These bodily responses create a feedback loop. The physical discomfort makes the psychological distress even worse, which then amplifies the physical symptoms. This explains why uncertainty can feel so overwhelming, even when the objective risk is relatively low. Today's information environment doesn't help matters. We're constantly bombarded with conflicting data, expert opinions that contradict each other, misinformation and propaganda from bad actors, and just an overwhelming amount of information that our brains simply weren't designed to process. Many of us mistake having more information for having a better understanding, but that's not always the case. Information overload can actually increase our sense of uncertainty rather than reduce it, creating a vicious cycle where we seek more data, but we feel less and less confident in our decisions. The discomfort of uncertainty explains many seemingly irrational behaviors, like why people sometimes prefer a definite negative outcome over an uncertain one that might be better. For instance, studies have shown that patients might choose a treatment with guaranteed but mediocre results over one with potentially excellent but uncertain outcomes. This powerful aversion to ambiguity drives many of our decisions, often without us even realizing it. Our brains are efficiency machines that use mental shortcuts, or heuristics, to navigate uncertainty. While these shortcuts can be helpful, they also lead to predictable biases. Take the availability heuristic. We tend to overestimate the likelihood of events we can easily recall, so If you've recently read about a plane crash, you might suddenly feel nervous about your upcoming flight, even though the statistical risk hasn't changed at all. Another fascinating bias is ambiguity aversion, famously demonstrated by economist Daniel Ellsberg. In what's now called the Ellsberg paradox, he showed that people generally prefer known risks over unknown risks, even when the unknown option might mathematically offer a better outcome. We're so uncomfortable with ambiguity that we will pay a premium just to avoid it. Similarly, the way information is presented to us, called framing, dramatically influences our decisions. The same medical treatment, when described as having a 95% survival rate versus being described as a 5% mortality rate, triggers completely different emotional responses and decisions, despite being identical information. Perhaps most troubling is our overconfidence bias. When faced with uncertainty, many of us believe we know more than we actually do, especially in areas where we have some expertise. This explains why financial advisors confidently predict market movements, doctors sometimes dismiss diagnoses, and business leaders make bold forecasts about uncertain futures. The reality is that a little bit of expertise in a domain often increases confidence more than it increases actual predicted accuracy, leading to massive errors in judgment. This is one reason I like to provide research lists with each episode, so you can dig deeper on your own about the topics we discuss and don't just have to take my word for it. Even though I have multiple degrees and years of experience in various psychology, business, and marketing disciplines. These cognitive patterns aren't randomly distributed. They follow predictable patterns tied to how our brain processes information. For example, research into what's called the peak-end rule shows that when evaluating uncertain experiences, we primarily remember the most intense moment and how things ended, rather than the average or sum of the entire experience. This explains why a single shocking outcome can disproportionately influence future decisions in similar contexts, even if it was statistically unusual. These mental shortcuts aren't signs of stupidity. They're built-in features of human cognition that helped our ancestors survive, but in our complex modern times, they can lead us astray. Understanding these biases is the first step towards compensating for them. By recognizing when the availability heuristic might be influencing your fear or when framing effects might be swaying your medical decision, you can take a step back and consider whether your intuitive response is trustworthy. When we face uncertain situations, our brain engages in a fascinating neural tug-of-war. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and logic, battles with the more emotional limbic system. Brain imaging studies show these regions lighting up differently depending on how we're handling uncertainty. Literally a battle between our rational and emotional minds. Our brain's reward system, driven by dopamine, is constantly trying to predict outcomes and their associated rewards. When those predictions are wrong, we experience what neuroscientists call a prediction error, which forces our brain to recalibrate. Interestingly, these prediction errors affect people differently. For some, they cause anxiety and stress. For others, they trigger curiosity and exploration. Your personal response to prediction errors might help explain whether you find uncertainty terrifying or exciting. What's fascinating is how uncertainty processing changes across your lifespan. Children's brains, with their still developing prefrontal cortex, process uncertainty differently than adults. And as we age, many people show shifts in their tolerance for certain types of ambiguity. The anterior cingulate cortex, which helps detect conflicts between what we expect and what we experience, shows different activation patterns at different life stages, potentially explaining why our relationship with uncertainty evolves throughout our lives. Functional MRI studies have revealed increased activation in the insula, a brain region associated with emotional discomfort during uncertain decisions. This suggests that the discomfort of uncertainty isn't just psychological, it's a physiological response that we can actually see happening when we scan the brain. At the same time, different people show different patterns of activation, which helps explain why some individuals seem to thrive under uncertainty while others become completely paralyzed by it. Most concerning is what happens to our brains under chronic uncertainty. Long-term exposure to unpredictable environments can actually reduce working memory capacity, increase stress hormones, and make us more susceptible to misinformation and simplified narratives, especially concerning right now. Our cognitive resources become depleted when we're constantly navigating uncertainty, which explains why periods of prolonged ambiguity like economic recessions, regime changes, or pandemics can lead to collective exhaustion and increasingly polarized thinking. Our brains crave clarity so desperately that we will often embrace oversimplified explanations just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. Stress and uncertainty create a particularly dangerous combination. When we're stressed, our attentional focus narrows significantly, a phenomenon we call cognitive tunneling. This tunnel vision means we literally see fewer options and consider fewer factors in our decisions. It's like trying to navigate a complex maze while only being able to see a few feet in front of you. The combination of time pressure and uncertainty is also problematic. Research by psychologist Jora Kanan has shown that when people face both time constraints and ambiguous information, they tend to reach conclusions before considering all available data. They jump to solutions prematurely and stop searching for better alternatives. This explains why emergency situations often lead to flawed decisions. The very moments when good judgment is most critical are the moments when our cognitive resources are most compromised. Perhaps most troublingly, high stress combined with high uncertainty makes people particularly susceptible to authoritarian messaging. When we feel both threatened and confused, we tend to gravitate toward leaders or sources that project absolute certainty, even if that certainty is unfounded. History has repeatedly shown that societies under stress and uncertainty become vulnerable to simplistic ideologies that promise clear answers to complex problems. These stress responses under uncertainty aren't just psychological curiosities. They have measurable impacts on our decision quality. Research comparing decisions made under calm versus stressed conditions shows that stress reduces our ability to integrate complex information by up to 60%. Our working memory capacity, essential for weighing multiple options, can decrease by as much as 35% when we're both stressed and uncertain about outcomes. This degradation happens so subtly that we rarely recognize how much our cognitive capacity has diminished until after we've made our decision. The stress of uncertainty also increases our tendency towards groupthink. Research shows that when faced with ambiguous situations, we conform more readily to group opinions, seeking the psychological comfort of consensus, even when the group may be wrong. This explains why during periods of collective uncertainty, like a financial crash or health crisis like a pandemic, we often see herd behaviors emerging, from panic buying to market bubbles to denying the efficacy of masks. The psychological security of moving with the crowd can feel safer than making an independent judgment when the future is unclear. Not everyone responds to uncertainty in the exact same way. Some personality traits make a significant difference in how well people handle ambiguity. Research shows that individuals high in trait neuroticism, the tendency to experience negative emotions intensely, often struggle more with uncertainty. Conversely, those high in openness to experience typically adapt better to ambiguous situations, viewing them as interesting challenges rather than threats. Cultural and environmental factors also shape our relationship with uncertainty. Studies comparing decision-making across cultures suggest that people from collectivist societies may be better equipped to handle certain types of uncertainty by leaning on group wisdom and shared responsibility. Meanwhile, those from more individualistic cultures might feel greater internal pressure when facing uncertainty alone. Our early childhood experiences with unpredictability also leave lasting imprints on how we process uncertainty as adults. The good news is that tolerance for uncertainty can be developed. Cognitive behavioral therapists have pioneered what they're calling uncertainty exposure therapy, deliberately putting people in ambiguous but safe situations to build their tolerance muscle. Just like exposure therapy can help people overcome specific phobias, gradually facing uncertainty in controlled contexts can help reduce the anxiety it triggers. This suggests that our relationship with uncertainty isn't fixed. We can train ourselves to become more comfortable with not knowing. As always, remember, if you are autistic or have a similar neurotype, cognitive behavioral therapy may prove more challenging for you, and you might want to try another solution, like somatic therapy, which can achieve the same thing. Genetics also play a significant role in uncertainty tolerance. Twin studies suggest that approximately 30 to 40% of our response to uncertainty is heritable, with certain genetic markers associated with both anxiety disorders and uncertainty intolerance. This biological predisposition interacts with our experience to shape our unique uncertainty response profile. Some researchers are even exploring how these genetic factors might influence career choices and life paths, with certain professions attracting those with either higher or lower uncertainty tolerance. Socioeconomic factors play a role as well. Someone with financial security makes fundamentally different decisions under uncertainty than someone living paycheck to paycheck. The luxury of being able to take risks often depends on having a safety net. This economic reality impacts everything from career choices to health decisions to retirement planning. Understanding these disparities helps explain why uncertainty is experienced so differently across socioeconomic groups and why one-size-fits-all advice about decision-making often falls flat. So, how can we make better decisions when the future is unclear? One powerful approach comes from Daniel Kahneman's work on System 1 and System 2 thinking, which we covered in our very first episode in more detail. To recap, System 1 is our fast, intuitive response system, and System 2 is our slower, more deliberate reasoning process. When facing uncertainty, we can train ourselves to pause the automatic System 1 response and engage System 2. This might mean literally stopping, taking a deep breath, and consciously considering alternative interpretations of the situation before we decide. Scenario planning, a technique popularized in strategic leadership, offers another valuable approach. Instead of trying to predict a single future, scenario planning involves imagining multiple possible futures and preparing for each. Organizations have used this method for decades to navigate uncertain business environments, and we can apply that to our own lived experience. The key isn't to predict exactly what will happen, but to expand your thinking about what could happen, making you more adaptable regardless of which scenario unfolds. Strategic use of mental simulation can also improve decision-making under uncertainty. By vividly imagining different outcomes and your responses to them, you build mental muscle memory that makes you more adaptable when facing the real situation. Military strategists, chess grandmasters, and emergency responders all use forms of simulation to prepare for uncertain scenarios. The key is making these simulations detailed enough to trigger genuine emotional and cognitive responses, which strengthens the neural pathways you'll rely on when facing actual uncertainty. Practices that build cognitive flexibility can also help us navigate uncertainty. Mindfulness meditation, for instance, has been shown to reduce reactivity to uncertainty by creating space between the stimulus and the response. Journaling about past successes in uncertain situations can build confidence in your ability to handle ambiguity. Even simple techniques like deliberately considering the opposite of your initial judgment can help break through cognitive biases and open your mind to possibilities you might otherwise dismiss. Finally, we can improve our decision hygiene, the practices that lead to cleaner, less biased decisions. Techniques like pre-mortem, or imagining your decision has failed and working backward to understand why, red teaming, which is having someone deliberately challenge your thinking, and Bayesian updating, which is systematically revising probabilities as new information arrives, can all improve decision quality under uncertainty. These approaches don't eliminate uncertainty completely, but they help us navigate it more skillfully, reducing the influence of bias and making our decisions more robust to whatever the future holds. As we wrap up today's exploration of uncertainty and decision-making, I want to leave you with some perspective. Uncertainty isn't a bug in the human experience, it's a feature. Every major advance in human history, every creative breakthrough, every moment of progressive growth has required stepping into the unknown. The discomfort we feel facing uncertainty is real, but it's also navigable. The research we've covered today shows that our response to uncertainty isn't fixed. We can build our tolerance muscle through deliberate practice. We can recognize when our biases are driving us toward poor decisions. We can employ tools and techniques that expand our thinking beyond automatic responses. And perhaps most importantly, we can develop a healthier relationship with not knowing, seeing uncertainty not just as a threat, but instead as a space of possibility. Think about how you personally respond to ambiguity. Do you freeze? Do you rush to judgment? Do you seek excessive information? Or do you embrace the openness of the moment? Understanding your own patterns is the first step toward changing them. Try applying one technique we discussed today to the next uncertain decision you face, whether it's a career choice, a relationship crossroad, or simply how to navigate our increasingly unpredictable society. Thanks for listening to PsyberSpace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. As always, until next time, stay curious, and maybe this week, try staying a little more comfortable with the uncomfortable feeling of not knowing what comes next. And if you've ever made a decision under pressure and looked back thinking, why on earth did I do that? We'd love to hear your story. Share your experience with uncertainty and how you handled it or wish you handled it on our social media channels or in our Patreon. See you next week.